Well, so how did you come to blend Jewish music and hip hop? And how do you oi yo?
Yeah.
There's a great sculpture in Brooklyn.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It basically sums up Brooklyn, right?
Yeah.
How do you do that and not fall into parody, gimmickry, just being like one of these YouTube like these
funny Jewish rap things.
Funny Jewish rap things that are so cringe.
Ugh.
Because I'd say your stuff is anything but that.
Well,
it's novel, but it's not a novelty.
Right on. Amen. Thank you, sir. I mean, I'm trying, and it takes work, but it's not really work. It takes first of all, you got to understand the bits that you're putting together. If you're going to make a fusion, you can't just understand one element really well and then tack on another element.
Wouldn't it be funny if?
Or like, hi, I love reggae, but now I'm gonna. Well, that's a tough. I mean, Jewish music has its own set of complications of working with it because Jews forgot how to do it. It had to be relearned. It's not a living tradition the same way that reggae is a living tradition, or that Balkan music is a living tradition, or salsa, or all these world musics. Jewish music got lost, and so it's been.
Would you say
three or four generations
lost in the sense of actively?
Sorry.
In some sense, obliterated, right? Like we're talking. It wasn't just like losing your keys, or was it?
Right. I mean, well, it was sort of. It's a complicated story, but basically 3 or 4 elements that went into this. There was the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Where basically Yiddish culture was literally burned off the map. Like the source of it, millions of people died. The people that spoke the language and danced the dances and sang those songs and played the instruments and wrote the stories in Yiddish, they died. They were killed. So there was no old country to go back to, and there was no old country to be just bubbling along with stuff. So
no country for old mensches.
Yikes. Okay. Yeah,
that's the first.
I mean, yeah, and then in North America, and in the diaspora in general, in South Africa, in South America, wherever the Jews had managed to be away from Europe, they assimilated, and they wanted to fit in, and they didn't want. They didn't want to rock the boat. They were finally in a place that was free, where they could pass as white.
Yeah.
And so they were like, okay, don't use that language anymore. And it was active. It was an active suppression. The third thing, the third major reason for the death of Yiddish really was Israel, the founding of Israel, where they really wanted to establish a new identity of this modern Israeli identity. They revamped this old language of Hebrew and made it a new Israeli Hebrew identity, which was smart because they had Jews coming from all over the world, so they didn't want just Yiddish, for example. Like they had to accommodate Jews from Arab lands and from North Africa and whatever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, okay, Hebrew is the new Jewish language. Well, they also actively suppressed Yiddish.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was illegal to do theater in Yiddish, if you can imagine. They shut down Yiddish newspapers. It was like a real political move to not have Yiddish. Meanwhile, you had all these people that were Yiddish speakers living in Israel. I was
going to say, yeah.
And eventually it started to sneak into things, and they couldn't help it. They loved that stuff. I mean, imagine losing your whole culture, then moving somewhere. Okay, we have a new reality, that's fine. But it's like, can't we just keep the baby in the bathwater? Like let's keep Yiddish around too. Well, they didn't. And so for many generations, Yiddish was this secret language that people spoke so the kids wouldn't understand. That's a cliche, but it's sort of true. And so for someone who wants to play with it now, you can't just go talk to the people that do it and work with them and learn and stuff. No, I mean, now there's been generations of people trying to learn it again. So there are resources and there are people you can go talk to, but it's not the same as if you're a Latino and you want to play with salsa music in your hip hop, where you go and just work with salsa, which is a living tradition. This takes a whole other element of archaeology and like research and discovery to get to a level where you're like, okay, I feel comfortable with this culture that was mine. It's my culture. These are my grandparents. This is their music and their literature, their language. Okay, great. But it wasn't mine, so I've got to go relearn it first. So you got to understand the elements you're playing with.
Yeah.
So I started learning the language because of those old records and because I wanted to be able to sing some of those old songs. Eventually, after I started just collecting records just to sample and looking for breaks and loops and stuff, well, then I started falling in love with the music itself. I listened to the whole record. I didn't want just the little break. And then eventually it was like, I'd love to, like, who's singing this stuff? Like, someone's got to say, I want to sing this song. So I started just transcribing old Yiddish songs, like, just phonetically, not knowing what they meant, but just writing down the Yiddish as well as I could. Then I would talk to a Yiddish person. They'd help me fix it up so it would at least sort of make sense. And then through the years, it's been, okay, learning words, learning vocabulary and grammar a bit, and then Duolingoing now for a while.
So what are some tropes of Yiddish lyric writing? Like what are some categories of what Yiddish songs are about? If that's not too stupid a question, and how they go about expressing it in a particularly Yiddish way.
It's not a stupid question, but it is sort of a funny question because the answer is sort of what you would expect, which is that there's Yiddish songs about everything.
Okay, great.
Because you know what I mean? Like, it really is a full spectrum, especially now when there's new Yiddish songs being written. So there's Yiddish songs about every subject under the sun.
Right.
If you look at traditional Yiddish songs, that's what you meant. But even those are, I mean, there's such a vast repertoire, and there are lullabies, children's songs, work songs, sort of communist or just like worker songs. There's family songs. There's holiday songs. There's political songs. There's satire. There's religious songs. And that's sort of just in the secular Jewish world, like those aren't religious even songs. So and that's just sort of a tiny fraction, because music is actually super important to Jewish practice. Obviously, I mean, even
are there sexy songs?
There's super sexy songs. There's songs about prostitutes and criminals. There's songs about there's ghetto songs. I mean, there's a lot of songs from the Holocaust era of people writing while they're in the ghetto, and they're writing songs, and those songs became hits around the world at the time. Yeah,
there's that partisan song.
There's the great partisaner lead, that was sung by these people in the forests that were fighting the Nazis. That's an amazing song. I actually have this is a book of a certain repertoire of Yiddish songs that I did with a string quartet lately. This project called Die Frosch, the Frog. Gewein is a frosch in a greensamet Kleid. Quack, 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 quack. Gewein is a frosch in a greensamet Kleid. Mit a Schürzel a weißen von vorn gesprayt. And so I found a bunch of my favorite songs and arranged it for a string quartet. So me with a string quartet singing these songs, the old arrangement, some of them old piano charts from the 20s and 30s. I converted into string quartet parts, or took old recordings and transcribed them. But I just thought I would look at some of these with you.
I'd love that. Yeah, please.
Here's a song. I mean, and then there were authors, there's famous writers who wrote lyrics, that not just folk songs, you know what I mean? So there was folk songs, and you don't really know who wrote them, but then there's Then there's art songs, like these sort of more sophisticated songs, sort of like German Lieder. And yeah, oh, by the way, theater songs, Yiddish theater.
Right.
That's another
Right.
huge side of lyric writing. Oh, and I should tell you about the Badchen. Have you ever heard of that term? Okay.
No.
So the Badchen is a big source of Yiddish lyrics, or just attitude, Yiddish kind of lyrical attitude. It was this figure at Jewish weddings who was sort of the MC.
Sitzt da, jeder kommt to get a bring a bisschen. Die Leute gaan daar hype toen essen, de rest nog even schreeuwen. Het is een hype toen gaan brekkelig of the boord of the brain. Het is schrecklich.
But he was sort of tied to the band too. Jewish weddings used to go on for a week, like literally, like all day for a week. You would party with music, drinking, and eating and stuff. Sounds pretty fun to me. So and sort of at the heart of the ceremony was this guy, probably more of a guy than a girl. I don't know if there's examples of female badchens, but the badchen would rhyme and freestyle.
Jetzt kommt es mal von Chusse wie kalle Blei. Ausriefen jetzt, das ist mein Missie. Teier Chustle, Jeser Sissie. Ich bin nicht umgekommen zum Mitzvah-Tanz, komm mitgehalten, du der Kidem. Jetzt kann man sich nicht verhalten, sind wir freundliche Jedidem.
And keep the party going, and do songs off the cuff with the musicians.
Wow.
And yeah, and really was the rapper, was the MC
The
rapper.
MC. Yeah.
And yeah, and so a lot of Yiddish theater, like a lot of the first Yiddish theater people like that invented it, this guy named what's his name? Oh, now I'm just blanking on his name. But the inventor of Yiddish theater, he was a big fan of badchens, and in fact, he would do badchonis at weddings. It's just, it was an attitude. I mean, Yiddish theater came from basically badchonis and this thing called Purim spiels, like plays for Purim, where they used to tell the Purim story.
Yeah. Just
Theatrically.
for my dear Goyim out there, that's a Jewish holiday in the spring, one of the many that commemorates us almost being exterminated, then exacting our revenge, or at least surviving. It's, they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat.
Just stop reading at that point. Don't go on to where it talks about the Jews going out and killing all their enemies. But so the Purim spiel was like allowed, a place where you were allowed to put on a show.
Yeah.
And you would have people acting the parts and stuff. And then I guess in the 19th century, people were like, hey, that's kind of fun to tell a story theatrically. Why don't we just do that without Purim? Like, okay, we can put on a costume. And so that was the birth of Yiddish theater. But the Badchen is super cool figure in Jewish lyric, like MC history. So okay, so we got the Badchen, we got these political songs, the theater songs, and then people that are just well-known writers, lyric songwriters, poets. And one of the great poets was called Mordechai Gebirtig, and he was in Krakow. And he, in fact, I mean, he died when they emptied out the ghetto of Krakow. He was killed. But before that, he wrote hundreds of songs.
Did he write the 10 Krakow commandments?
Oy. See? That's not a bad one, actually. That's pretty good. Yikes. Okay. He couldn't read music or write it, but he would like whistle the melody to a friend who wrote it down, and his songs like were famous during his lifetime. He became famous. And one of his songs is called Kinderjahren, childhood hours or years. Kinderjahren, süße Kinderjahren. And so this is an example of kind of a sentimental written actually, it was probably before the ghetto. Like, this was probably written in the 20s and 30s.
Wo ich bin geboren, oi gezeugen. Euch mein Wiegel seh ich dort, steht noch auf demselben Ort.
But it gives you a sense. I'll just read you some of these lyrics.
Yeah,
Years
please.
of childhood, sweet years of childhood. Forever you will stay in my memory. Whenever I think of those years, my heart sinks and I feel sad. Oh, how quickly did I become old. In my mind still stands the little house where I was born, where I grew up. And there I see my cradle. It still stands at its place. And all that is faded away like a dream. I can still see you, Fagala, you beauty. I still kiss you on your red cheeks, and your eyes filled with grace sink into my heart. I thought you would become mine. Years of childhood, I lost you. I lost my dear mother, too. From the house, nothing is left. Fagala is gone, too. Oh, how quickly have I grown old.
Oof.
And I'll just say it to you a bit in Yiddish, just so you get
Please.
a taste of the language. Kinderjorgen, süße Kinderjorgen. Ewig bleibt dir wach in mein Zikorn. Wenn ich tracht von eurer Zeit, wird mir so von Bang und Leid. Oi, wie schnell bin ich schon alt geworden. Noch steht mir das Stiebel vor die Augen, wo ich bin geboren, euch gezeugen. Euch mein Wiegel, seh ich dort, steht noch auf demselben Ort. Wie Cholem ist das als verflogen. So kind of a beautiful poetic structure.
Yeah.
And Yiddish is I think well suited for rhyme. Like, I don't know, some languages, I mean all languages must be, but there's something very satisfying about the way Yiddish rhymes. I don't know.
Well, it has very particular phonemes.
That's it.
To the outside ear, it almost sounds like it's designed to be comic, but I think that's because of the American, in the American context, Yiddish is
It's a joke.
associated with, it's a joke, schmuck, schmendrick, you know.
Yeah, no,
but,
totally. And that's
I mean, as
part of
opposed
the
to,
that's part of the assimilation,
yes.
and the shame, and the self-hatred, and the
Yes.
and the not having
Self-deprecation.
pride in our culture.
Yeah.
Haha, schmuck, schmendrick. No, it ain't no joke. I mean, I told you what these lyrics are. They're fucking serious, and the language is beautiful. But if you want to assimilate and you want to play it down, that's what they did, and so yeah, you and me, we have this. That's a joke. Like, it sounds funny.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and sad because it's. I mean, there's so much incredible poetry. It's also packed full with idiom and like and dialects and so many. It's such a mix of languages that words have very specific shadings to them. So like, if you use a certain word for something, it means it's from a certain part, or it has a certain connotation of a time or a place. And it's like a hidden language too. Like within it, you could say something, but it's not literal. You know, it's like that's actually meaning something totally else.
Well, how much like hip hop is that? And both.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Both were,
That's it.
founded in ghettos where people had to speak in code,
That's
and
it.
where language. One of the things that amazes me about hip hop is that with every passing year, there are new shades that come into the
Yeah.
language. Like Kendrick Lamar is saying things in ways that
You
that
couldn't understand if
you wouldn't have been able to understand years
Right.
ago, but now in context, like it comes through clearly, but it's this
Right.
new specific, and the shadings you talk about, the attitude with which it's being said is embedded within it. And yeah, it's, and every borough and every
Right.
region
That's
has
it.
its own slang. Like when
That's
Wu-Tang
it.
came out, they were talking in ways that no one had ever heard before because most
Right.
people never crossed the river to Staten.
Right, but if you're initiated, if you're from Staten, it speaks right to you, and it's so efficient because it's like it's a special language just for you.
Yeah.
And it's a language of a disenfranchised.
Yes.
It's not the mainstream. It's not. I mean, people in Poland, in Krakow, they would have spoken Hebrew so that they could read the Torah. They would have spoken Polish to work in the market. and to speak to their Polish neighbors. But then they would have spoken Yiddish at home, and they would have sung in Yiddish at home, and they probably would have had theater in Yiddish and a cinema for them in Yiddish, and that was for them. And if you have a language just for you, where you're talking about what's going on, that's super efficient, and that's totally hip hop. And it's also like, I mean, that's why there's so many criminal songs and underworld songs, and a whole language for them, actually, of special words from the Yiddish underground and Yiddish thieves and stuff. There's this whole there's a word for it, I can't remember, but like thieves language. Also klezmer, actually, the musicians that played the music, they had their own klezmer loshen, this klezmer language. And it was a mix of Russian and Balkan languages. It was a mix of Romanian and Ukrainian dialects.
German too, yeah?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it was based on Old German, like basically Middle High German 1,000 years ago. Before German was an actual language. Jews are there, and Jews are speaking the language that's being spoken, which is this pre-German. And, okay, they took that, and then they started writing that down using Hebrew letters. And then they started moving around, and they are traveling from Romania to Ukraine and into Germany, and they're bringing those languages, and it's being mixed into the German, and I mean, it's a crazy story. All languages are like that, by the way, of course. I mean, even English is like a mix of this and that, and over thousands and hundreds of years, it smooths out into one actual language where you can have a dictionary for it. And Yiddish, it was a 1,000-year process where that happened.
Well, that's a very rich broth.
And so that's why, like, in one sentence, it could have a word that's from Hebrew, a word that's from Ukrainian, a word that's from Romanian, that are all transformed and meaning the opposite of what they mean in their original language. Like, it's the opposite in Hebrew in Yiddish, like in certain circumstances. I mean, that's language. That's the magic of language. It makes it very hard to learn it too. It's like, it's not just Duolingo. Oh, mine. Okay, yours.
Right.
Fair enough. That's a good start, but it ain't.
No, you got to live in it. You need the lived context.
So Yiddish lyrics. Wow, that's a whole situation.
All right, homie, you're doing great, and lots of love, and may Poopsie rest in power, and may her memory be for a blessing, as we say.
It sure is already. Okay.
Yeah, buddy. Peace.
Be well.
You too.
See you soon.
Bye.
Leben die Breggen von den Jebstädter Städtele, sie Zaporozhye der Nomen. Sie ist dorten mein Seide am Moleke Jorgen, a Hinzu zum Leben gekommen. Dorten hat ois gebeut a Stiebele, Fuß ist gebeugen mein Tate. Avesen reiselig, mottelig, josselig, machen schon alle L'chaim.